Yeah, hi, Panos. Welcome
Hi, good
back.
morning. Good morning, good morning.
Let's have a look at a theoretical overview of conflict resolution, which is the topic that we'll discuss today. Obviously, it's a big thing. There's lots of stuff that goes with it, and the depth of it is quite loud. I don't think one session would be enough to cover all of that. So therefore, we will have
Yeah,
each of the topics in more detail in a group scenario. So that's the aim that we're going to. But for today, let's just handle and I believe there's 7 steps that we're going to go through on a
yeah,
theoretical level to set the scene. There is so much, forgive me, crap going on in South Africa from government right through to personal level and engineering and everything in between. And I think for me, it's becoming an extremely volatile situation. And if you don't have the tools to deal with conflict, you're going to have a problem. And we're
yeah,
having problems already because the emotions are starting to override the logic thinking, and people literally are tackling one another face on. And
yeah,
all of the education and the mindsets and the and the and the tools that you need is out the window, and it influences your business, your personal life, your clients. So I think it's time that we start discussing this and get people the tools
yes,
to to deal with it. Man, you agree?
yeah. No, no, absolutely. You see, what, of course, we are generalizing because this is an overview. Already you mentioned we can do individual sessions for each of the steps or maybe one or two at a time. So for today, the purpose here is to set or to create a setting
Mm.
so that everybody knows why we're doing this, how it's going to work, and what is the new information. I mean, everybody knows about conflict resolution. There are mediators out there who are professionally qualified and all that kind of thing. What I'm proposing is there's a hidden dimension to this, which makes it more workable. If the person is capable of accessing that hidden dimension, sometimes they need an assistant, which is also fine.
Yeah,
But once that hidden dimension is made clear, a whole lot of options open up. And when that hidden dimension is covered up, to be honest, there's very little hope. Maybe by chance, people will come to an agreement, but it can't be
yeah,
done by design. And again, having an engineering background by design to me means a lot.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so, and so the idea here is to introduce the viewers to a different way of looking at themselves, obviously, and others, both, so that new options can arise. The alternative is you go to a professional and they sit you down into different rooms and you say this and he goes to the other room and he tells them what you said and he comes back to you and backwards and forwards. It's out of your hands, basically.
yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
suggesting, well, excuse me, to the extent that individuals, let's call, to use the familiar word, empowered to deal with themselves first, then one can hope for them to be creatively involved with others, conflict resolution, and so on. So that's
yeah.
the general purpose. Now, before we even start on that, okay, just a bit of an introduction.
Okay.
There's a guy called Benjamin Libet. This fellow, many years, 20, 30 years, whatever, more longer, 30, 40 years ago,
Yeah.
he went and stuck electrodes into people's brains. Okay. He found them conveniently in hospitals where the skull was removed for various operations that they needed. So he
Yeah.
went and stuck electrodes in specific parts of the brain. And he measured what he calls free will. How did he do that? He gave them a task to perform, which required a decision, this or that. And precisely to the millisecond, he managed to identify when the decision was made. And then what he showed to the public
Mm.
is that the brain was busy working, for example, to move the body to do something depending on the decision that followed before the decision was made. And so he said,
Okay.
especially for short time frames, when things happen quickly, there's no free will. What happens is people react. They cannot
Okay.
respond because the neurology that is in place, and it will react. Now, this is very important.
Okay.
What I'm telling you at this initial stage is that it's almost impossible to do conflict resolution if you or me or anybody is, let's call it, emotionally disturbed.
Yeah.
Okay? Because under that set of conditions, there is no free will. And if there's no free will, there's no choice. And behavior is compulsive. And so we kind of regressed to a level of survival where obviously free will is out the window. So that's number one. There's another guy called Anil Seth. We've mentioned him before.
Yeah.
From the UK. He has shown that most of our experience, what's happening now, me seeing you on the screen and all that, is actually constructed, not actually, it is in fact constructed and projected. Now, this is quite a shock to the average person because what do? They open their eyes and they see the world and they say, I am here, this is the world, I am seeing you. Well, it's not quite like that. We all know how the eyes work and how the information goes to the visual cortex, but that's where it ends. We don't know how perception happens. What Anil has shown is that through the experiments that they've done, and of course you can look this up, they've shown that the brains kind of, as he puts it in his own words, hallucinate something and then go outward, as it were, with information to verify. So what I'm trying to say by this is that we have to be clear, and I will demonstrate all of these things. We have to be clear that each one of us is living in a different universe. What I see and what you see, not only is it not the same because of how we see it, it's completely different the way we interpret it. So that's another thing. It's a foundational piece. Without this information, we're drifting in space, okay? So it's really important to know. I mean, I've been in education for 40 years, so I can promise you I've tested this thoroughly with students, right, every day. So what I imagine I'm saying versus what the other person is hearing, what lands on their ear, because they might be distracted, right? Some of it might not even land. And then how those words get interpreted, well, then good luck. And so that's another level of the conflict resolution puzzle, okay? And then the last bit is the emotional state of the person. As I mentioned it already, I'm kind of repeating it. I'm saying if a person is not in a, let's call it positive or inspiring or creative, rather, let's say creative state of mind, they're not going to find creative solutions. It's too simple, actually. So the emotional state of the person will either allow or prevent the creative parts of their brain to be switched on to find solutions. And the classic example, certainly in my world, and I'm sure anybody who's done any studies at all, is you spend, months in the classroom, in the lab, whatever it is, you study for an exam, and you show up on the morning of the exam or whatever it is, you sit down, and your brain's empty. You think, my God, I've forgotten everything. What that means is that particular person, I've had the experience, every one of my students has had it, it's very common, right? They're under stress. When they're under stress, the brain, to protect itself, shuts itself down. And it just retains the fight and flight stuff. The kind of thing that police officers and army guys train and train and train and train to put it into muscle memory, as they call it, to be effective, say, in a battlefield, for example. But in an exam, you want your higher brain to work, and it isn't working because you are emotionally stressed. The brain doesn't know the difference. Stress is stress. And so without the right frame of mind, creative possible solutions are impossible. My creative solutions and your creative solutions may be different because I'm imagining one thing, you're imagining another. We're going to cover all of that. So this is the background. There's no free will when the brain has to make decisions quickly. There's no free will if the brain is emotionally stressed. And when there is free will, most people are lost in their fantasy. And that's where conflict arises. And so what we will do, having said this now as a background, I'm going to walk you through the 7 steps as they were outlined here. And then we will discuss each one of them. And hopefully this should be sufficient for today. And so let me just run through the list, and then I will remove this sharing, and we will talk for each step about each step in turn.
Perfect.
So the steps as they stand here is, number one, establish the points of disagreement. Now, that might seem simple. I mean, to be silly. Oh, no, the goat got over the fence and ate my rose plants or something stupid, right? Okay, fine.
Yeah.
This is the story that people tell. It very seldom has anything to do with the real conflict. And so the initial story, in other words, the facts, where people say, what are the facts of the case? Oh, the goat got over the fence and ate my rose bush. Yeah, okay, that's the facts. But the conflict is not about that. If it wasn't your rose bush, and if it wasn't the other person's goat, it would be just a joke. Oh, look, the goat is eating the roses, so what? And so the interpretation of the events or the interpretation of the facts is, in fact, where the conflict lies. Okay? So, as I said, we're going to go in depth to each one of these.
Yeah.
So establish the points of disagreement has a lot of layers into it. Number one, what are the facts? The goat got over the fence, ate the rose bush. Okay, fine. How is it a conflict? And then each person will tell you their story. Oh, you know, this blooming goat, it's always been whatever, and his grandfather had 3 goats, and my grandfather didn't have, I mean, they'll tell you a story. And the other one will say, no, but you know, this fence never used to be here. And I mean, okay, each one will give you a long story. And sometimes it's ridiculous. They'll go back, who knows? I mean, in Greece, where I come from, people fight vendettas over such things. Generation,
sure.
it's insane. And again, if we look at it in the South African context, you know, the usual, the apartheid is to blame for everything, all of it. So people will tell you a story to justify their emotional experience. But that's step one.
Yeah.
Once you've established what the story is and what the internal representation of the story is, the next step is to find out what exactly, if this conflict was resolved, what will it do for me or you or the other person? What is the positive intention?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it that I want the exact same rose bush? Or, for example, do I want 10? The goat ate 1. If I can have 10, I'll be very happy, for example. And so to establish what is the inner positive intention behind the thing that I want. So, for example, with respect to the rose bushes, let's say I'm the party that the goat ate the plants of. What I'm really trying to do here is to, what they call in some cultures, save face. I don't look like, and again, I'm using the Greek example. I hope it's culturally neutral in South Africa.
Yeah.
I don't want to be seen as an idiot. The rose bush is just a bush. But my personal standing in society, oh, that's a different matter. And so if this simple animal jumping over the fence and eating a few roses, in my mind, translates in a sort of an insult to the kind of person that I am, then I'm fighting for my life. There's no longer the bush. I'm now worried about what the neighbors will say. And when I go down to the village square, people will look at me and say, this is the guy that the goat ate the bush, or he's an idiot. Okay. And so, and this is real. This is, I mean, we're making fun, but at the same time, fine. So therefore, it is important to establish the inner positive intention from both parties. What is behind the story, what is behind the facts, which is also behind the story that they told. So we're going layer 1, facts. Layer 2, this is my story, internal. Behind the story is my positive, what do I want? What do I really want? The positive intention.
Okay.
Now, then, that was with regards to the event. Now we go to the other side. Go into each person's inner representations of the desired outcome. First, in terms of the events, then in terms of positive intention. What does that mean? It means this. What will serve as resolution? Now, remember, we are trying to resolve the conflict that exists because of my secret, let's call it, secret,
Yeah.
sacred, sacred,
Yeah.
secret, right? Positive
Yeah.
intention. So if I'm trying to save face, to use that example, right?
Yeah.
The bush is never going to be enough. Okay? So even though
Okay.
the
Yeah.
issue is the goat ate the roses, and my
Mm.
positive intention is to look good in society, right? Clearly, the restitution has to address the positive intention. Now,
Okay.
will the bush, if you get another bush, for example, will that do it? Well, perhaps. Maybe it has to be another bush must be planted, and there must be a whole bunch of witnesses to see.
Okay.
The thing can become completely ridiculous. But remember, we are trying to address the root cause, not the symptom, not the surface, but the
Yeah.
deeper level. So
Okay.
into each person, therefore, has an idea, a fantasy, let's call it a fantasy, of what the desired outcome would look like. So you have to explore that, because otherwise, if it's just about the bush and the goat, I mean, you know
Yeah.
what
I know.
happens. People say,
Yeah.
hey, no, I don't want this bush. This is a special bush. It was given by my uncle. I mean, it goes on and on, right?
Yeah.
Then, in order to allow the parties to come together in a new spirit, okay, because as long as they remain locked in fear or anger or shame or whatever emotion they're stuck in, their higher brain functions out the window.
Yeah.
There's no solution to be found there at all. And so, having identified what the real issue is, having identified what's really at stake, the hidden motives, okay, the inner positive intentions, then we say, okay, fine. To arrive at a solution, both of them have to step back into being human. And this is it's a bold statement to make,
Yeah.
but it's a.
Yeah.
If I'm fighting for my life, I'm not at the human level.
Mm.
I've regressed to the level of survival, which is fight or flight. In the neuroscience world, it's called the mammalian level of the brain, or even worse, the reptilian.
Yeah.
And so at the level of animal, which is purely emotional, at the level of reptilian, which is purely reactive, there cannot be solutions. It's only conflict.
Mm.
And generally, if one were to jump off this boat for a second and look on a different situation, what happens? There's a war. People kill each other until they realize, okay, we've got enough, or one of them loses. Then they negotiate.
Yeah. The wrong way.
So
That's
why go
wrong.
the long way? Why not go directly? So therefore, if one awakens the creative part in each party, then solutions become available. This is a critical step. Without it, success is very limited.
Okay.
And then from that, having identified a creative part in me, having identified a creative part in the other person, we start laughing about it in a different state of mind. Suddenly we go, wow, why didn't I think of this?
Yeah.
How simple. So then we can identify creative options so that all positive intentions are satisfied. This is again critical. New creative options to satisfy the real issue, which is my hidden, secret, sacred, positive intention and the other party. Okay.
Yeah.
And so by finding new options that satisfy the positive intention of both parties, but are accepted by both. Okay. Once that's been done, we're not done yet, because those two people have agreed. But wait a minute, they're not living in isolation. Again, using the example of the village, just for the sake
Yeah.
of this discussion.
Yeah.
Right? Well, each one of them operate within a context. Okay, so therefore, having identified new options, can they now be tested in the context in which they have arisen? Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last step, not only the context, but other stakeholders. So, for example, the families of the two people. The goat ate the rose bush, but what does the wife say? And what does the
Yeah.
other wife say? Or the children, or whoever, whatever. Okay. And so, first, you have to check the result in terms of the context. Because, for example, in one context, there's conflict, in another, it's not a problem. I mean,
Yeah.
if the bush was sitting on its own in the field somewhere and some goat ate it, what's the conflict? Nothing. But
Yeah.
because the bush is in my house, well then, okay, so context. Secondly, everybody else around the issue, have they been also included? Because very often the two people agree, they go back to where they come from, and the others say, what? I don't want it, I wanted something else. So the context, therefore, and the peripheral stakeholders must be included until because if either of these pieces is not put in place, it's going to be a thorn in your backside kind of thing. It's going to keep on nagging, either nagging physically or nagging mentally. Somewhere there's going to be, and then conflict will come up again. And so this is a complete solution, if I can be bold to say.
Yeah.
Now there's a problem, and there's a huge issue here. I mean, this is obvious. I'm going to say it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, people say you can take a horse to water if it doesn't want to drink, nothing. So the key ingredient is people must want to find solutions. Now, in the example that I gave earlier, if conflict escalates to physical violence, right, the decision is made after people have been beating each other or shooting at each other, and then they realize, okay, we've gone too far. You know, the First World War in the trenches, they were shooting each other until eventually, you know, what I'm saying is the willingness to come to a resolution is a prerequisite. Now, there are other ways, which I don't think we're going to really go into, of resolving conflict in spite of willingness. Okay, in other words, let's call it, I don't want to say forced resolution, but let's put it like this. Supposing the conflict is between a child and an adult, you know?
Yeah.
Real life scenario, my daughter's got a 3-year-old son. When she's not in the room, we all get along. The mother steps into the room, is a different child. Conflict. I mean, this is simple. I'm just using a okay, fine. Now, my response to the little guy versus the mother's response to him and the father and everybody is different.
Yeah.
And it's a very deep level. He's figured that out. And he knows how far to push his luck, as it were, with me or with her or with the father or with his friends, for example. If you see him at school, there's another guy again, right? And so what I'm trying to say is, therefore, in the case of a 3-year-old, the way you would resolve conflict is not going to go through all of these stages. That would be silly. Okay? And so one has to be realistic. What I'm trying to say basically is the assumption here is that we're dealing with parties that are on par, at the same level of society or authority or whatever word I mean, like sometimes when I was in the lecturing environment, I had to lay down the law. This is the way it's going to be. I want it by Friday, 3 o'clock. That's a deadline. If you miss it, you fail. Done. I'm not negotiating. I'm telling. Okay. And any conflict that arises is for me to decide. So I'm making all this clear up front, because in the absence of those things can become convoluted, and obviously we don't get anywhere. So the assumption is there's willingness to resolve the conflict. The parties are on par. They're on the same level. If not, they have representatives, like if it's a legal conflict, and I don't understand law, well, I better go and get a lawyer, because then I'll be lost in the woods, right? And so on. So all of this is now background. So from this point onwards, I'm going to remove the screen, okay?
Before you start, just a quick question from our side. These 7 steps, am I right in saying that if you establish that step 1, 2, and 3 are there already, and there's no problem with it, you can directly go into step number 4 and move on from there. So you don't have to follow them. Yeah.
No.
So that.
No.
Okay. So it's actually steps that you can implement at any stage if you have established the other ones prior to that before. Because especially in contracts and the engineering contracts that everybody uses, you can establish some of those points up front, because the contract talks to it. These are the facts. It's in discovering that hidden stuff. Why are you actually now resisting what you signed for in the first place? Okay.
Right. So now this is a very important point. You're making it real. Thanks for asking the question. You see, if people have written a contract out chances are they didn't write it. Some lawyer wrote it, okay?
True. Yeah.
And depending on the person's ability, experience, and all the rest, the contract can be inclusive or not. I mean, if you look at some contracts, there are pages and pages and pages. And why are there pages? Because lawyers learned along the years, hey, you know, this time we had a case, we lost it, put another clause in. A year later, something new happens, you put, so then the contract becomes this long, bloody sermon. Okay, now, this is a very important point. Some years ago, we had a consultant, he came out of Dubai. Okay,
Yeah.
he was a business consultant, particularly with conflict resolution. And what he had wanted, myself and some other colleagues in Johannesburg then, he wanted to run his course, as it were, past us, to give him feedback to see how good it is, put it in those terms, okay? Now, this wasn't necessarily conflict resolution, but conflict resolution was part of it. What he had done, he had designed a structure, a map of mapping cultural preferences. Because, for the obvious reason, in Dubai, especially 10, 20 years ago, even now, there were a lot of building projects. And you'd have, let's say, I don't know, fictitious stuff, an Italian architect with a German engineer, an Arab contractor, and Indian laborers. Well, good luck trying to get them to agree on anything. Okay? Not only do they not understand each other, but they have different ways of reacting. The Italian will say, hey, I will like this, and the German will say like this. Now, I'm cutting this to the bare bones for the sake of this discussion. The fundamental difference in that environment was this. There are two broad categories of individuals. There are many others. I'm just highlighting this for the sake of this discussion. Right? The one is this. Some people look at the written contract and say, this is the agreement, what it says here in words. Other people couldn't care less about the written part. It's the relationship that we have. Now, and in South Africa, this is a huge problem. Okay? Some people, the rule says 1, 2, 3, 4, you agreed, you signed, you must do it. The other person says, I'm not interested in that. What kind of relationship do you have? Okay? Now, this is really important. And in South Africa, specifically, I can give you my own experience, right? In my lecturing or project, whatever days that I've had, if my relationship with the students was not there to start off with, I couldn't get anywhere. Like really, I mean, my job became like a mountain because there was resistance on all sides. As soon as the relationship was sorted, and the way that I managed to do that worked for me, was to give time. So some guy will come in my office to answer questions, because I used to do face-to-face evaluations, no written stuff, right? If the person didn't know the answer to something, remember these were projects, right? Not theory subjects. They had all the freedom in the world. I mean, sometimes, not at the end because of COVID, but the years before, I'd be in my office on the ends of the 2 semesters. I would be in my office at least for 3 weeks, at least until midnight. Because the amount of work to be covered was so large and the number of students were so many. For me to deal with each one of them, I said, okay, I'm not going to abandon you, but this is the standard. If you can't meet the standard, go and do it again, come back. And they will go and come back and go, and eventually we get there, right? Now, in that context, my extending myself that way, not abandoning them, in other words, was good enough to know from both sides that we have a good working relationship. Then they were willing to go the extra mile. Okay? And so in the context of South Africa in particular, relationship is critical. And there we go into cultural differences, backgrounds, what people are used to. I mean, my grandmother and your grandmother and the other one, it's just a long story. And so the point that I want to make here is that there are certain things we can take for granted. In the case of Dubai, a German engineer with an Italian architect and an Arab contractor have to understand up front. Sometimes a translator might, and I don't mean linguistic translator, I mean a translator as a mediator. Let's say a mediator to listen to what the German is saying and translate it into a way that the Arab would feel respected.
Mm.
And what? Yeah. And the Italian, okay, the meeting will only happen at 10 because he doesn't get up until 9, or whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah.
And so these are subtle nuances which are layered. We don't have time to go into all of this today, right? But I'm
Yeah.
just trying to set the setting to say, okay, in South African terms, there are two fundamental aspects to this, especially engineering or technical or business contracts. There are people who are contract, the rule, the law says this, these are the rules. And those kind of people generally are not really interested in relationship. On the other side of the fence, there are people who are also about relationship. You are my cousin, I know your father, he knows my uncle. These people know
Yeah.
everybody. We're all one. We can't let each other down. It's all relationship based. And
Yeah.
the rules can go out the window, right? And so it's important to keep all of this in mind because this is a very complex subject. And I don't want to make it sound, oh, well, it's simple, we can fix it. No, we have to be at least conscious. Okay, so from this perspective now, let us revisit the 7 steps. Give me an example from a technical context.
One of the engineers that I spoke to a couple of days back that was
Yeah.
in a conflict situation. And
Yes.
what happened there, by the sounds of it, it turned a little bit nasty at the end. And it was a simple thing. They're busy with the roads project. And, various people appointed at various roles with various responsibilities. And a simple thing like the grade of stone that was supposed to go into the road became a contentious issue.
Right.
Whereas the engineer said, this is specified, these are the products, and this is what must be used. And the contractor, who's a friend of the client, decided, no, they're going to do their own thing. And they did their own thing, and he said, well, the road's going to fail because you're not adhering to standards. And then the fight started.
Right.
And it turned quite nasty, and the client doesn't want to listen to the engineer because his chummy is now saying this, and he's a contractor, and he's now cutting most probably corners using not the right materials, and
Yes.
and a simple thing technically became a big story. I don't think it's even resolved yet.
Great. So let's use this. Now I'm going to ask you from your mind, whatever
Yeah.
ideas come up, doesn't matter. This is an example in any case, right? We said we will
Yes.
do a real one in the future. So for now,
Yeah.
still fictitious, but a little bit more practical than just a goat and a rose bush. Okay?
Yeah.
And so if I were to say to you, the points of disagreement, what you've said, so because you've given us the fact, is that the grade of stone was wrong, or
Yeah.
not according to standard. Let's not say wrong. It was not according
Yeah.
to what was specified. Okay.
Yes.
So theoretically, there should be no conflict because it said use grade X, you didn't, now you go and fix it, there's no conflict, it's done. Contractually,
Yes.
the person should be obliged.
Yes.
And so therefore now let's look one step behind that. When the designer designed the road with X type of stone, in his mind, now this is you guessing, okay, just take a guess, what do you
Yes.
think was going through his mind when he designed it?
Well, as an engineer, the first principle is you look at the standards and what the standard says. So what you specify is correct. That is how it should be in his mind. This is the right way. I'm adhering to the standards. Part of my responsibility as the engineer is sustainability, which means if you're not going to use this road in a couple of years from now is going to fail.
Exactly.
Anything substandard is not going to work.
Now, let me share with you my fantasy on the same story. When
Mm-hmm.
you talk about materials failing, back, oh goodness, no, Jesus, when was it? 79? Like that far back?
Yeah.
I attended a subject called Strength of Materials. And the
Okay.
lecturer's name was Dan Zyman. I'll never forget him because he was a dragon. And when we would go into the lab and we would get a piece of steel in the mechanical, those are mechanical subject. I did electrical, but in those days we used to
Yeah.
do mechanical, right? They used to give us a piece of steel, and there was this big machine in the lab, and used to put the little steel sample there, and then it pulls and pulls and pulls, and boof, it breaks. And then you measure how many, kilonewtons was applied and all the rest of it. Having this Don Zineman on the back of my head was like a horror movie. Oh, I mustn't do it wrong, right? So let's assume now I'm the engineer doing the design. And this thing has been recorded in my mind. Don't mess up the standards when I'm doing the design at some deep level, which I'm not even consciously aware of, there is a fear in me, right? That I must do it right. Now, I do the design. I've done it before, so I've got confidence, all of that. I give it to someone else. The someone else looks at it. Now, again, you try, guess. What do you think the contractor was imagining?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because if I now have to think on his behalf, he looks at it and go, this is over design. And I think, if I may interrupt myself here, he also called the engineer incompetent because he doesn't know what to specify. So those kind of language was used. Now back to the point again. I think the contractor looks at it and go like, man, stone is stone. I can use other stone that's cheaper, that can do the same job. So I'm going to save my friend some money, and we can use it, and it won't be a problem.
Okay.
It's all I can guess.
No, okay, wait. This is very important. For the audience, I'm addressing the audience now, not you, okay? I'm saying, audience, please pay attention to the way your voice changed. When you were playing the role, as it were, of the engineer, you had a certain demeanor, you were speaking in a certain way. Suddenly, as the contractor, you're going like, well, I can make a plan, I can make a... And anybody who's watching the video, I mean, I can see it, obviously. You couldn't because you were in the role, you were in character, right? Suddenly, you took on yourself the body language, as best as you can, of the contractor. And even more fascinating, you didn't come to counter your argument with facts, like the specific strength or whatever, tensile or compressive strength or whatever those stones are classified as. You didn't have none of that. No, the guy's incompetent, man. What does he know? I've done these roads before. I've seen them. However, the contractor may not have a clue what happens when the temperature drops to -20 or something. And then the stone that he wants to use crumbles or crystallizes or doesn't bind anymore, whatever. And so therefore, he may not know the range of problems or the design specifications, the conditions, in other words. I mean, Dubai, the temperatures get to 60 degrees Celsius in the sun, right? Or even more. Good luck trying to use the same method that you're going to use in Norway, where it goes to -40. Right. No. And so therefore, now the contractor, he's right, because in his mind, he's only got those kind of videos, the roads that he's built, the money that he's saved, and how he wants to be, let's assume, a good motive, want to help his friend. So his motive is not, this road will be here forever. His road is, we'll do the best we can. We'll save some money. We're going to have a braai and everybody's happy. Now, this is just to start the conversation. Okay? And so the contractor's priority here, we're making assumptions, but again, this is that kind of video. His top priority is to help his friend and save him some money or whatever. Or even have his own financial benefit. Sometimes if the quote is for X and you can do it for half X, the other half goes into your pocket, whichever way.
Yes.
The design engineer probably, I hope he doesn't have this problem, but he might have to pay monthly insurance that his designs will not fail. God forbid, if this road were to fail, and if he's a registered person, and then there's an inquiry, he might lose his license, he might lose his certification. I mean, it's serious, right? So from his perspective, he might have over-designed for the sake of saying, listen, I'm telling you this will not fail. The other person says, yeah, but it never happens here like this, it will be okay. And so therefore, the one guy is fighting for his professional integrity as well as his livelihood. Because
Mm.
if the word gets out in the street, this guy did a design, it failed, people go, well, I don't want to go back to that guy. Why would I go to
Yeah.
him or
Mm.
her? Let's not leave women out of this, right?
Yeah, no, true. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then if you really want to go down that rabbit hole, is it a black guy? Is it a white guy? Oh, and then horror movies, right? Okay. So,
Mm.
therefore, we've managed so far to identify that each of the, and this is fantasy, I'm saying it again, let's not lose track of things, but even
Yeah, yeah.
though we have two conflicting movies that have very little in common, the only common point, the point of contact between the contractor's universe and the designer's universe is that one little what is it, a half a millimeter thin piece of paper with some black marks on it. That's the interface. Beyond, the one is from Mars and the other one is from God knows where, right?
Yeah.
And so, for the sake of the discussion that we are having, that would be the first step. Obviously, I said it before, I'm repeating it, important point. Are they willing to resolve the conflict? Now, supposing they are willing, because they've realized whatever they've realized, they say, okay, we want to do it, we just don't know how. Okay, good. I would spend as long as it takes, because here we're playing a game, it happens quickly. In real life, it takes much longer, right?
Yeah.
To get into the mind of the designer. You see, a lot of people find that kind of inquiry, if you like, invasive.
Yeah.
It's worse than
Yeah.
getting people into your house. Getting people into your head is like, whoa, hang on a minute. I'm not sure if I want to do this, right? And so all kinds of possibilities are there, and techniques may have to be used for the person to feel comfortable, to look inside their mind, see exactly what's going on,
Yeah.
and sometimes, fortunately or otherwise, face their deepest fears. I mean, if this guy is really fighting for his livelihood and his personal integrity, those fears are deep seated.
Yeah.
They didn't start at the point of the contract. They started, who knows, back in his life as a child, right? Okay, so this is big stuff. I'm not making light of this. And the same thing for the contractor.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, once it becomes obvious to both parties that they're coming from a different universe, literally, suddenly there's a kind of, wow, I never imagined this. I thought we were
Mm.
arguing about paper. Meantime, this poor guy is struggling to feed his family. This fellow is worried what will happen to him tomorrow. Should he immigrate? What should he do? I mean, it becomes a different thing altogether. Then, in some cases, that is enough to resolve the conflict immediately. Oh, I never realized. My God,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Oh, now that I know, thank you. So there's another
Very true.
possibility which is possible. Sometimes it happens right there. Next step, however, seeing that we have all seven, let's run through them, right?
Okay.
I've already touched on it. I'm just repeating it. Let's assume the designer, he's what you call it, in a positive intention, his professional integrity and his livelihood.
Yeah.
Assuming he's a private guy, right? He's not employed, in other words. So he has to keep a good name in the marketplace, and people must go back to him for repeat business and so on. So for him, this is serious. Okay, he might be married, he might have kids, he might have a bond. I mean, all kinds of commitments, right?
Yeah.
So for him, this is survival. The other guy, on the other hand, I don't know what his motives might be, whether it's profit or trying to help his friend, or who knows what. Or maybe it's also like, who the hell are you to tell me I know what I'm doing? It might be kind
Yeah.
of like an attitude, an ego thing. I don't know. Who knows? I don't want to make the contractor look bad here. I'm just saying they might have a different motive. Okay. Those two things need to be identified, because ultimately, when this thing is resolved, if it is resolved, it will be
Yeah.
because that has been satisfied. Okay?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
those
Okay.
deeper, secret, sacred, positive intentions haven't been satisfied, it will go to lawyers. And I mean, I don't know. I
That
mean,
gets
I've been
messy.
myself, so it gets, people will spend any amount of money to prove them. Okay,
Yeah.
so those secret, sacred intentions must be acknowledged, identified, and put on the table. I'm actually fighting for my life here. No, I'm actually fighting for my whatever good name in the business world. And then we're approaching this with a realistic perspective. So that's number two. Now comes the next step. What does resolution look like? Now, as much as the problem has a hidden imaginary dimension with an emotional foundation, the resolution also, because the one person imagines a movie in their mind of what the solution would look like and how it would feel, and so does the other person. The contrary might say, okay, you know what? We'll do? I don't know, again, making up stuff. We'll go and buy this special treatment thing and we'll pour it onto the stone and suddenly, I don't know, which is a cheap solution, let's assume.
Right? Yeah.
The designer, on the other hand, might say, well, I don't want my name on the design, or I don't know, some other thing. And so we have to identify not only what the problem not only how the problem is represented in each person's mind, how they feel about it, and what's underlying that. We also have to do the same process, again, if we're doing a thorough job and if it's a complex situation. Right? We have to identify, what would resolution look like? Now, on the first run, the first time around, trying to find resolution, right? There's no creativity involved because those guys were coming from a survival mode. They're not thinking, they're reacting. But it's a good starting point. We can say, okay, my intention is to save my professional name and to keep my livelihood if I'm the engineer. The resolution is you rip up the bloody road, you go and buy a new stone, and you do it again. The other guy says, like hell I will, I'll see you in court. So for the one, resolution is fix the road. The other one, I'll spend the money now that you've insulted me, I'll take you to court. Okay, well, right. So clearly that's not an option. I mean, it is, but it's not an option. Okay.
Yeah.
And so therefore, what we are saying then is to get around that problem. Step 4, it says awaken the dormant creative part in each person. Yes. So here we're playing games, right? I had an experience like this in an engineering environment where I was talking. There was a group of 5 people working as a team, and the team leader was a very right and wrong, do it right or not do it at all, do it on time or the hell you get fired, these kind of people, very rules based. The rule says you must do, right? And the other team members were actually quite afraid of him. To some extent, it compromised their performance because they were always like, is this guy going to come down on my head? Okay. But anyway, the 6 of us, 5 of them and 1 me, 6. We sat around one day, sort of in a relaxing atmosphere, away from their working environment, sort of in a garden setting, if you like. And we started talking. And the conversation went to, so each person had to share some experience that they find inspiring. Okay. So we're not doing conflict, nothing. We just 5 people, like team building. It was team building.
Okay.
We're not resolving conflict, right? When the turn of the manager came to speak, it was mind-blowing. Now, how it happened, why it happened, I can't say, but it happened. What happened? He kind of sat back in his chair. Normally he would be like, he kind of changed his posture. And he said, inspiring, all my life, I wanted to farm. Now, remember, this is an engineering guy living in an engineering environment, 9 to 5 and whatever time they keep, right? In his head, he wants to be a farmer. So he started telling us about his fantasy, right? And my role is to make the fantasy more elaborate, not more elaborate, sorry, more clear, more detailed. So really, is it a farm? Where's the farm? Oh, it's in the northern province. Great. And what do you see when you look? Oh, I see this and that and the other. And where are you sitting? Well, I'm sitting on the stoop. And what time of day is it? Oh, it's afternoon. And what's going on? The sun's going down. I can hear them. And he's giving us this movie that's inside his mind already. I'm not suggesting it. I'm just asking, what do you see? I see this. Look to your right. Oh, I see the cows. Look to your left. I see the mountains. Look ahead. What do you see? The sun's going down. What do you hear? I hear this particular bird. I don't remember what bird it was. And then can you smell that? Oh, I can smell the whatever. I can't remember how long. Let's say we took 10, 15 minutes, him telling his story. He melted. He became a completely different person.
Yeah.
Now, we're sitting in the premises of the working environment, and those four people have never met him like that.
Mm.
And they're going, who's this? What? All right. Now, which was fascinating because as we kind of got to the stage of, and my role was to ask him certain questions. We will do this in detail. At the moment, we're just introducing.
Yeah, true.
Our role was to bring his attention on his own experience. And when he expressed it in words, I can't remember the exact words, but something like, now I am fulfilled. My life is complete.
Yeah.
With that feeling, you can find solutions to anything.
Mm.
If you caught the same guy literally 15 minutes or 20 minutes earlier when he was, well, I'm the boss of this thing and I know how the rules are and this is how we do it and this is how we don't do it. If you caught him in that state of mind, there's no solutions. It's just the rule of the law.
Yeah.
But if you just allow him, or help him rather, to step back in the part of him that he felt fulfilled, his life was complete, then suddenly generosity comes out. I mean, if all your dreams have come true, you've got lots to share. When you're fighting for your life, forget it, buddy. You go and die by yourself. I don't want to know your problems, you know? And so this is a critical step. Again, the assumption is people want to go down the road, right? And most people do, actually. Most people do. They might not feel comfortable doing it in the presence of others. And again, provision must be made for separate discussions, all of that. I mean, this is background I'm just sharing, okay? Now, from that perspective, then, okay, having awakened either this creative or generous or whatever inspired part of the person is, then only, and I'm talking neuroscience now, the brain goes, ooh, like I'll share something from my life, right? I enjoy most mornings, not every morning, it's not a thing that I must do, but most mornings when I wake up, I've got quite a big sized bed. I go and sit on the other side of the bed. I sit up, just a little bit of breathing and just calm down and just observe, you know, what's up today. And 9 out of 10 times, first of all, I will remember things that I have to do. And also, this morning, I had a very wonderful inspiration. We're working, myself and this business associate of mine, Leon, we're working with a client that wants to refurbish a church. And there's a whole lot of conflict with the committees and I'm in all kinds of trouble, right? But it hit me, hey, hang on a minute. This conflict is based on one person's opinion versus another person's opinion. So I wrote her a message. I said, hey, by the way, why don't you ask, now this is a little bit fanciful, but allow me. Why don't you ask the patron saint of the church to decide? In other words, in your next meeting, say, if, I don't want to name, Saint so-and-so was present with us today, what would he want? In other words, turn the conversation away from my opinion and yours, and whatever the saint says we must do must be in the service of Jesus. It's a Christian church, right?
Yeah.
Which completely obliterates, I believe we should do it this way. No, we should do it. I, boop, out the window. Saint so-and-so is in the room. And you know, these guys can be, right? And we're not here to please you or you. We are here to deliver the people, in their minds at least, to be closer to the divinity of the world. Oh, wait a minute. Completely different attitude. Now, for me, this happened this morning simply because I just had a moment of silence. I didn't have anything to do, nobody to think about. Suddenly my brain just switched on, boom, and this idea came up. When we had a face-to-face meeting with a client, that never even occurred to me. I was saying, no, we must find out what the other party wants and try and see this, and then I was in reactive mode.
Yeah. Yeah.
This moment, with not even an agenda, are just sitting there quietly, boop, it came by itself. So that kind of brain function must be understood. It needs certain preconditions to happen. And for me, because I'm used to it, I sit in the morning, inspiration comes, I write things down, I share them, whatever. So what I'm saying, therefore, is everybody is capable of that. And I can almost say from my own life experience, when people make decisions from that part of themselves, no matter what happens, they are forever grateful.
Okay.
When they make decisions from that other miserable, frightened, fighting for your life, clawing, they are forever in regret. Even if they don't say it, inside they go, oh, I wish I didn't do that, but I had to, blah, blah, blah. And so there's no permanent resolution until the deeper part of the person has come to the surface. Now, this is a big thing I'm saying. I'm aware of it. I'm not making light of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think, engineers, they're all about head. No, I don't agree at all. In fact, if I may be so bold as to say, my experience in the engineering world has been blissful, because in the majority of times and cases, people are civil, and I don't mean the discipline, right? They get along. I mean, I don't know how to put it. It's a wonderful environment.
Yeah.
They're not very boisterous. They're not like the fine arts guys jumping around. But inside, they are very sensitive people. And so what I'm saying, I've experienced 100 times. It's not a new thing. I'm just sharing that.
Yeah, no, agreed.
Okay.
I agree with you.
So having identified that there is a dimension of inspiration, gratitude, and so on, bringing that forward, then creative solutions come. And then, like we mentioned already, repeating it now, we're not done yet. We agreed this resolution would help. Okay, fine. But let's say in the context in which it has to happen, you know what happens in that part of South Africa? It rains. Oh, shit. Now we can't do it this way. We wait a month or two. Or, I don't know, the community has other ideas, or who knows what. So you have to deal with the context. When and how and what needs to be done in the context in which this issue has arisen. Like, for example, the guy might have specified the stone is no longer available, it has to be imported from China, I don't know what. I mean, there's a context.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And finally, the last step is, who else is affected? Okay. Oh, okay, wait a minute. What? Because, for example, to be facetious, right? Let's say the contractor and the engineer say, you know what, bloody hell, use whatever stone you want. You pay me some of the profits that you've made, and we both walk away and forget about it. Okay.
Yeah.
But now trucks run on the road, and 5 years down the road, it's in pieces, and there's potholes everywhere and so on. So what I'm saying, therefore, is to come with a solution that just the two parties agree on is not necessarily a solution, because whatever the issue is, there's a context and there are other stakeholders. So those are the last two steps. So the individual, the two individuals, 1 and 2, the internal world in terms of the problem, the internal world in terms of the solution and the state of mind required. Once a new creative solution has been found, we don't stop there. We go, what is the context? What are the other parties involved? Once all of that is done, well, then you're done. There's nothing more to say. I mean, obviously, things may arise. There can be a hurricane, I don't know what. But the point is, up to that point, what's humanly possible to be done has been done. Most of this work can also be done content-free. In other words, I don't have to tell you that it was Mr. So-and-so that did this or that. No. There's a person and there's something happened and I don't feel good about it. And we have a conflict.